Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our demonstration of the newest capability in Tenable Vulnerability Management, Vulnerability Intelligence. My name is Justin Buchanan, Director of Product Marketing for Vulnerability Management here at Tenable, and I'm joined today by Brittany Isaacs. Brittany, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what this Vulnerability Intelligence capability is?
Yes. Hey, everyone. I'm Brittany Isaacs, and I am Product Marketing Manager for Tenable Vulnerability Management. And really excited to be with everyone and share about this great feature that's coming to our VM product. Now, I think the best way to explain what vulnerability intelligence is to look at it through the lens and the pain points of the analysts and practitioners that are using our products. Now, they are inundated with waves and just a multitude of data intelligence and are left with, what do I do with all of this? And they need to have a solution for this that cuts back on the time that they're spending manually analyzing this. And so through this product, they can begin to really focus in on and have a great lens into focusing on the vulnerabilities that are most important to their organization. So every vulnerability has a story, and with vulnerability intelligence, you can know the vulnerabilities that attackers use and where you're exposed.
That sounds great. So let's go ahead and look at a representative example of when someone might use Tenable VM's vulnerability intelligence. You have a new attack that's come out and it's been mentioned in the news, perhaps this recent one that is occurring right now, linguistic lumberjack. And your boss comes to you and they're red in the face and they're saying, I heard about this thing on the news. What is it and how are we impacted and what do we do? Now, if you didn't have Tenable vulnerability intelligence, you'd have to go off on a search and start reading a whole bunch of different blog posts and trying to bring all of this information together so that you can answer your boss. If you have Tenable vulnerability intelligence, it's pretty easy, actually. You just come here into the interface, you start to type in the name of the vulnerability. For linguistic lumberjack, we'll just type lumberjack. We'll go ahead and click on this, and then now we have all of the details that we need to know about this particular CVE, the linguistic lumberjack CVE. And we can even take this summary that's produced here by the Tenable research team and click copy right here, and we can drop that right into an email to our boss to help explain to them what this vulnerability is. Now, Brittany, I know that there's a lot more information here that we can see about any given vulnerability. Can you tell us what else we should direct our attention to?
Yeah. Well, we'll first direct everyone towards the events tab. And this is a really powerful view of the timeline of a vulnerability from its discovery date through the current date and time. Now, for this example in particular, you can see when a first proof of concept was delivered, when the NVD was published, as well as when EPSS scores and changes in VPR scores were assigned. You can see for this one, the VPR was originally assigned a 6.7, but due to events happening in the wild and different analysis, the VPR was increased to a 9. Now, from there, something else that's really great and cool to show is the scores tab. And what you can do on the scores tab is see the VPR scores and EPSS scores and trend lines over time. So again, this one is a pretty new vulnerability. So there's not a whole lot of change that's happened with the EPSS, but you can see that there was a change in the VPR that was noted in the event timeline. And additionally, you can see those key drivers. So additionally, the next thing that I would direct your attention towards is the plugins tab. And the plugins tabs give you the ability to show the plugins that are associated with some vulnerability that Tenable has developed to help remediate. Now, if you click on that, you're brought to the Tenable plugins page, where you're able to see a much more detailed overview of what this plugin is and what it does, and the details associated with that plugin.
That's great. Thank you, Brittany. So that shows us how we can look up a specific vulnerability. We could search by CVE, or in this case, we searched in natural language where we typed in lumberjack. But what if we want to proactively identify threats that could impact our environment? That is where this great dashboard comes in here. What we are looking at is what we call our threat-sagons. These hexagons highlight key categories of vulnerabilities that are universally worth exploring more deeply. And you can see that there's a series of categories here, including CISA known exploited, recently and actively exploited, those in the news, those being leveraged by ransomware gangs, etc. For the purposes of today's demonstration, let's go ahead and look at the persistently exploited category. This is categories of vulnerabilities that have been used for a considerable period of time by attackers and are still being used. So now if we scroll down to the list here, we'll see the list of all of the vulnerabilities that the Tenable research team has identified as persistently exploited. And I can sort these in a series of different ways. I like to sort them with the VPR personally. So I'm going to click this twice so that my top VPR rated CVEs are here at the top. Now, let's go ahead and click on this first CVE. Now, interestingly enough, we probably could have predicted that when we're going to talk about a persistently exploited CVE that has the highest VPR score, of course, it would be the infamous log4shell. So now the same thing as we were just looking at with linguistic lumberjack, we have a great summary that's available to us here based on Tenable's knowledge and all of the different things that we've correlated together to give us a view into this. Brittany, what else should we make sure that people know about the log4shell vulnerability that we're looking at here?
So first, you can see that the event dates and timeline and details for log4shell are much more robust than it was for linguistic lumberjack. You can see any time that there was an exploit in the wild, the plugins that were published that are associated with this vulnerability, and all of the changes in scoring that have happened over time. Again, with the trend lines, you can see with this, there has been a bit of a change in EPSS over time, whereas VPR is stood pretty still at a 10 for most of the life cycle of this vulnerability. The plugins, you can see that there's a much more multitude of plugins that are associated with this vulnerability. And not only that, you can see different metadata that is associated with the plugins as well. Then what's really great about this, if you keep on scrolling down, is you can see how does this affect me? So really tying in that contextualization to your own environment and looking at which assets and which products are affected by this vulnerability in your environment. So if you look at that, you can see that there's 4 products that are coming up that have this vulnerability. And then if you go over to assets, you can see which assets are tied to those products. Or you can see that in that column right there as well. Something else that you can do with how does this affect me is start to do some light filtering as well by either plugin and product. So additionally, which is really great, and it's something that Justin alluded to when we first started, was the wealth of information and background intelligence that the Tenable research team has really poured themselves into over the years about curating all of this great sources of content that are associated with the vulnerabilities. So you can see here, as we're scrolling down, all of the articles that Tenable has tagged to this vulnerability, the sources that it came from, and where the source was tied back to, whether it's internal Tenable research or external.
That's great, Brittany. Yes, I agree. What I really like about this is when we have that moment where we need to explain what something is very quickly, we would need to read a lot of different sources. And in this case, we can see that Tenable Research has already gone through 72 different pieces of research, of blogs, of other information, and pulled that all together here in one place for us in this really simple and clear to understand view. So that is just truly fantastic and saves us so much time. So now at this point, we've looked up we've gone through how to look up an individual vulnerability by name or by CVE. We've looked up vulnerabilities that we should be paying attention to proactively by using our threatagons. And now the final thing that we're going to do is surface vulnerabilities based on specific criteria that is important to our unique organization. And the way that we can do this is by using what we call the advanced search, which is what we're looking at here. So now we have the opportunity to build advanced search queries. And you'll notice before I get started here, actually, that right now we have almost 240,000 vulnerabilities in the vulnerability intelligence database. So there's a lot of information here, and there's a lot to wade through. We're not going to be able to understand deeply all of these vulnerabilities, so we're going to want to filter them down. So let's start by using category. And this is the categories that were up above, but we can also search them this way. And one way that we can do this is by saying, let me see all of the vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited, that CISA has identified as those CISA KEV, known exploited vulnerabilities. If they're being actively exploited by attackers and CISA has identified that, it's something that we want to be cognizant of. Now, let's add another piece of criteria. Let's say not only do we want to look at vulnerabilities that we know are being exploited actively, but we also want to look at vulnerabilities that can be exploited remotely or over the network. So I'll add in, show me vulnerabilities that also have an attack vector equal to network. So what that does for us is says, okay, they must be being actively exploited and they must be able to be exploited over the network. Now, the final thing that I will add is that when I run my vulnerability management program, the way that I prioritize the risks to work on is by using the Tenable Vulnerability Priority Rating, the VPR. So let's use that in our final phase here and say, you know what? I only just want to see vulnerabilities that have the highest possible VPR, which is a 10. So if I go ahead and enter in these three criteria, now I'm only looking at vulnerabilities that are known to be exploited by CISA, that have an attack vector of the network so they can be exploited remotely, and that they have the highest possible VPR, a 10. And I took that 240 vulnerabilities down to 16 vulnerabilities, which is a much more manageable scope for me to explore and look more deeply into. So that's our quick demonstration of vulnerability intelligence. We'll close out our discussion here today. If Brittany, you'd like to give us a little bit of a recap of what we just looked at.
Awesome. So through our demonstration, we were able to pull out three key use cases. And first, it's that data consolidation. So as we demonstrated, Tenable Vulnerability Intelligence really has allowed the analysts and the practitioners to consolidate and that data that was being pulled from a multitude of different sources, and it's analyzing the data for them so that they can focus on the priorities that are most important to their organization. Secondly, and I kind of alluded to this in the first one, but they're allowed to streamline their analysis because Tenable Vulnerability Intelligence does the analysis in an automated fassion. Analysts can really quickly understand the details of those vulnerabilities without the need for that manual analysis. And then by doing that, they're able to surface and pick out those assets that are impacted by the vulnerabilities that are important to them and associate those back with critical threats. And then thirdly, accelerated response. This enriched intelligence and the contextualization enables task prioritization, but not only that, as Justin demonstrated on the summary page for each vulnerability detail, there's a quick, great summary that shows all of those details as well as the impact to your own environment. And it's something that you can really quickly and easily copy and paste over to your management team and show how you're impacted. So that kind of drives down to three key messages that we want to communicate through vulnerability intelligence. First is proactively search. You're able to really have multiple different ways of being able to proactively search for the vulnerabilities by that common name or CVE number, or build the complex queries. And that's really powerful because it allows you to filter in on the vulnerabilities and threats that are exploited and relevant to your environment. So secondly, all of that rich information gives you that contextualization that helps you make those decisions on what vulnerabilities to prioritize. And then thirdly, as we mentioned, you're really able to accelerate your response through this confidently and act on data that's based on the risk, and drive that protection in a quicker fashion than you would be able to do typically. And so with that, we're really happy to be here with you guys to share all of this great feature that's coming to vulnerability management, and hope that this has been helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany. And thank you everyone very much for your time and attention. We'll see you again soon.